I stood at the back of the church, watching my own funeral unfold. My husband Michael stood at the podium, his voice breaking with carefully practiced grief as he described how I'd tragically fallen overboard during our anniversary cruise. Sarah was everything to me, he said, dabbing at his eyes. I still can't believe she's gone. In the front row, my best friend Amanda sat with her head bowed, playing the part of the grieving friend perfectly. Her black dress probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Bought with my money, of course. What they didn't know was that in exactly 3 minutes, their perfectly orchestrated performance would be interrupted by something they never saw coming. Me. My name is Sarah Collins, and 2 weeks ago, my husband tried to kill me. But let me start from the beginning. The cruise was Michael's idea. 10 years of marriage deserves something special, he'd said, showing me the brochure for a luxury Mediterranean voyage. 2 weeks of sunshine, romance, and ocean views. I should have known something was wrong when he'd insisted on booking the trip himself. When he was suddenly interested in every detail of my life insurance policy, when Amanda started coming around more often with sympathetic looks and long private conversations with my husband. But I was busy running my diving school, training new instructors, and managing the business I'd built from scratch. Michael had always dismissed my work as a hobby, even though it brought in more money than his middle management position. You should sell the school, he'd suggested casually a month before the cruise. Take some time to relax, enjoy life. I'd laughed it off. The school was my life, the culmination of years of training, certification, and hard work. What I didn't tell him was that I just signed a contract to expand to 3 new locations. The first few days of the cruise seemed perfect. Michael was attentive, romantic even. We had dinner under the stars, walked the deck at sunset, acted like newlyweds again. Then came the night that was supposed to be my last. I was in our cabin, getting ready for bed, when I noticed something odd about my glass of water. There was a faint residue around the rim, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. Fortunately, I did know. One of my advanced diving courses covered underwater crime scene investigation, including a section on common drugs used in maritime accidents. The residue matched exactly what our instructor had shown us. I didn't drink the water. Instead, I watched through half-closed eyes as Michael grew increasingly agitated when his perfectly planned sedation didn't seem to be working. I heard him make a phone call. It's taking too long. We need to move to Plan B. I followed him that night, staying in the shadows as he met Amanda on the lower deck. They didn't see me. They were too busy kissing, too wrapped up in their own betrayal to notice they were being watched. Once she's gone, Amanda whispered, we'll have everything. Her life insurance, the school, freedom. Michael pulled her closer. Just a few more hours. I'll take her for a midnight walk on the deck, and then, a tragic accident. They'll never find her body in these waters. I slipped away silently, my mind racing. Years of diving had taught me how to stay calm in crisis situations. While they plotted my death, I started plotting my survival. First, I needed evidence. I returned to our cabin and set up my phone to record video, hiding it carefully among Michael's things. Then I went to the ship's security office. I need to report a possible crime, I told the officer on duty, one that hasn't happened yet. He looked skeptical until I showed him my diving instructor credentials and explained the situation. Together, we developed a plan. When Michael suggested a midnight walk an hour later, I agreed. I was wearing a wire provided by ship security, and there were cameras tracking our every move. We stood at the railing, looking out at the dark water. Michael put his arm around me, positioning himself perfectly for what he planned to do. It's beautiful, isn't it? He said softly. The way the moonlight hits the waves. I felt his muscles tense, preparing to push. It is beautiful, I agreed. Perfect night for a swim. Before he could make his move, I turned to face him. Just one question, Michael. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the sedatives? Or that I wouldn't find out about you and Amanda? His face went from confusion to shock to something darker. I don't know what you're talking about. No. I pulled out my phone, playing the video I'd recorded of his conversation with Amanda. Maybe this will refresh your memory. He lunged for the phone, but I was faster. Years of diving had kept me in better shape than he expected. As he grabbed for me, security officers emerged from the shadows. Mr. Collins, the lead officer said, please step away from your wife. What happened next would have been almost comical if it weren't so tragic. Michael tried to run, slipped on the wet deck, and had to be helped up by the very security team arresting him. Amanda was caught trying to book a lifeboat excursion in the middle of the night. They found a bag packed with cash and passports in her cabin. But here's where it gets interesting. Instead of turning them in immediately, I had another idea. With the help of ship security and later the police, we let them think they'd succeeded. A missing persons report was filed. A search was conducted. No body was found, exactly as they planned. Michael and Amanda played their parts perfectly, grieving husband and supportive friend. They waited the appropriate amount of time before being seen together publicly. They filed the life insurance claim. They even started making plans to take over my diving school. And now, 2 weeks later, I stood at my own funeral, watching them perform their final act of deception. Michael was just reaching the climax of his eulogy, describing how he tried to save me when I walked down the center aisle. The gasps from the congregation were audible. Amanda's face went white. Michael stopped mid-sentence, the blood draining from his face as he saw his carefully constructed plan crumbling before his eyes. "Please," I said clearly, my voice carrying through the stunned silence, "don't stop on my account. I'm dying to hear how this story ends." The church erupted into chaos. People were standing, pointing, whispering. Some looked like they'd seen a ghost, which, I suppose, they thought they had. "Sarah?" Michael's voice cracked as he gripped the podium. "How? What? How am I alive?" I finished for him, continuing my walk toward the front. "That's an interesting story. Almost as interesting as how you and Amanda planned to kill me." Amanda tried to slip out of her pew, but 2 police officers who had entered behind me blocked her path. Her perfectly mascara-lined eyes darted between Michael and me, looking for an escape that didn't exist. "I don't know what you're talking about," Michael said, attempting to regain his composure. "This is some kind of mistake." I reached the front of the church and turned to face the congregation. "Let me tell you about mistakes," I said, my voice clear and steady. Like the mistake of thinking a professional diving instructor wouldn't recognize signs of tampering with her water, or the mistake of planning a murder on a ship full of security cameras. The police were moving forward now, handcuffs ready. Michael looked desperately around the church, perhaps hoping to find sympathy among the mourners who'd come to grieve me. Instead, he found shocked faces and accusatory stares. "You can't prove anything." Amanda spoke up, her voice shrill. "This is ridiculous." I pulled out my phone and connected it to the church's sound system, something I'd arranged with the pastor beforehand. "Actually, I can prove everything." The recording played through the speakers, their voices crystal clear as they plotted my death. Michael describing how he'd pushed me overboard. Amanda laughing about how they'd spend my life insurance money. It's taken out of context," Michael stammered, but his protest sounded weak even to his own ears. "The context," I said, walking toward him, "is that my husband and best friend planned to murder me for money. The context is that you thought I was so insignificant, so easy to dispose of, that no one would question my disappearance." As the police moved in to arrest them, I noticed something that made my blood boil even more. Amanda was wearing my mother's diamond necklace, a family heirloom I thought was safely stored in my jewelry box. "Give it back," I said quietly. She reached for the clasp with trembling fingers, avoiding my eyes as she handed over the necklace. It felt heavy in my palm, weighted with generations of family history she tried to steal along with my life. "Mrs. Collins," one of the officers said, "we'll need you to come down to the station to make a formal statement." I nodded, watching as they led Michael and Amanda away in handcuffs. Michael looked back once, his face a mixture of rage and disbelief. Amanda kept her head down, her shoulders shaking with what might have been sobs or just fear of what was to come. The congregation sat in stunned silence. My sister Claire, who had been sitting in the back, rushed forward to hug me. "I knew something wasn't right," she whispered. "The way they were acting, it was all wrong." "That's because they're terrible actors," I replied, hugging her back. They were so focused on their performance they never stopped to think about the details. Like how a professional diver would know exactly how to survive in open water, or how someone who ran a successful business would have security measures in place. Or how the cameras they thought they'd avoided on the ship were just decoys for the real ones. As the church slowly emptied, people stopping to hug me or express their shock, I walked to the front where my memorial photo stood. It was a picture from 5 years ago, taken at the opening of my first diving school. I was smiling, proud, confident, everything they had tried to destroy. I picked up the photo and tucked it into my bag. It would serve as a reminder of how close I'd come to losing everything, and how their underestimation of me had been their downfall. The pastor approached me cautiously. "I've never had a funeral quite like this," he said with a slight smile. "Neither have I," I replied, "and I hope never to have one again, at least not until it's actually my time." Outside, reporters had gathered, drawn by the commotion and the police presence. They shouted questions as I emerged. "Mrs. Collins, how did you survive? Did you know about their plan? What made you wait until the funeral to reveal yourself?" I stopped at the top of the church steps, considering how to respond. The truth was complicated, a web of suspicion, evidence gathering, and careful planning. But they wanted something simpler, something that would fit in a headline. "Sometimes," I said finally, "the best way to catch a killer is to give them exactly what they want. My husband and his mistress wanted me dead. So I let them think they'd succeeded, and in doing so, they revealed exactly who they really are." The aftermath of my resurrection played out exactly as I planned. The evidence against Michael and Amanda was overwhelming. Video recordings, witness statements from the ship's crew, financial records showing how they'd already started transferring my assets between accounts. But the real story emerged during the investigation, a tale of greed, betrayal, and desperation that went back further than even I had suspected. I sat in the detective's office, reviewing bank statements that showed years of systematic theft. Michael, it turned out, had been embezzling from my diving school almost since we'd married. He was taking small amounts at first, Detective Martinez explained, spreading the documents across her desk. But in the last year, the amounts got bigger. We think he was getting desperate. Desperate enough to plan a murder, I said quietly, studying the numbers. Nearly $500,000 had disappeared over the years. He and Ms. Taylor had been planning this for months, Martinez continued. They had an apartment leased under false names, new identities prepared. The cruise was just the final piece. I thought about all the times Michael had discouraged me from looking too closely at the business accounts, insisting he'd handle the finances while I focused on teaching. How Amanda had become such a close friend, always there, always interested in every detail of my life and business. The preliminary hearing was set for a month after the funeral. I sat in the courtroom, watching as Michael and Amanda were led in wearing orange jumpsuits, a far cry from their designer funeral attire. Michael's lawyer tried to argue that it had all been a misunderstanding, that they'd never intended to harm me. But the evidence told a different story. The prosecution played the ship's security footage, Michael measuring the deck railing, timing the security patrols, marking the exact spot where he planned to stage my accident. They showed emails between him and Amanda discussing life insurance policies and the best ways to make a murder look like an accident. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, "this was not a crime of passion or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated attempt to murder Mrs. Collins for financial gain." During a break in proceedings, Amanda's lawyer approached me with a deal. She would testify against Michael in exchange for a lighter sentence. "She wants you to know she's sorry," the lawyer said. I thought about our 15 years of friendship, about how she'd been my maid of honor, about how she helped plan what was supposed to be my murder. "Tell her I received her message," I replied, "and tell her that sorry doesn't begin to cover it." The trial lasted 2 weeks. In the end, Michael was sentenced to 20 years for attempted murder, conspiracy, and grand theft. Amanda got 8 years for her role in the plot. As they were led away, Michael turned to look at me one last time. "I never thought you'd figure it out," he said, his voice hollow. "You were always so trusting." I met his gaze steadily. "No, Michael. You just never bothered to really know me. If you had, you'd have realized that trusting doesn't mean naive." The next few months were about rebuilding, not just the business, which had actually grown despite Michael's theft, but my sense of security, my ability to trust. I hired forensic accountants to go through every record, installed new security systems, and made sure every aspect of my life and business was protected. Never again would someone be able to take advantage of my trust. 1 year after the funeral, I stood on the deck of my newest diving boat, watching as students practiced their safety drills. The business had expanded to 5 locations, And we'd just been featured in a national magazine as one of the top diving schools in the country. Claire joined me on deck, handing me a coffee. You know what today is? I nodded. 1 year since I came back from the dead. She smiled. 1 year since you showed them that underestimating you was the biggest mistake of their lives. The sun was setting over the water, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, I could see another group of students practicing their rescue dives. Something I now insisted every student master. You know what the irony is? I said, turning to my sister. They thought they were so clever, planning my death at sea. But they forgot one crucial thing. What's that? The ocean has been my life since I was a teenager. I've trained hundreds of people how to survive in it, respect it, master it. They thought it would be my grave, but instead it was your salvation, Claire finished. I smiled, feeling the gentle rock of the boat beneath my feet. Exactly. They chose the one place where I was strongest to try to make me disappear. That evening, I received a letter from the prison. It was from Amanda, her once perfect handwriting now shaky and small. I think about that night on the ship all the time, she wrote. How sure we were that everything would go perfectly. We never imagined you were 10 steps ahead of us. I'm sorry, Sarah. Not just for what we planned to do, but for underestimating you so completely. I folded the letter and placed it in a box with all the other reminders of that time. The funeral program, the newspaper articles, the court documents. Then I locked the box away in my office safe. The past was secured, but my future was wide open. I had survived not just an attempt on my life, but the betrayal of the two people I had trusted most. And I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more successful than ever. As I walked through my office that night, I passed the photo from my funeral, now hanging on the wall as a reminder. The woman in that picture had been strong, but the woman I was now was invincible. They had tried to write my ending, but instead they had only succeeded in helping me begin a new chapter, one where I was the author of my own story, and no one would ever underestimate me again.